It's really a guide. It's not a definitive plan. It allows you to live fully in the present moment while still maintaining that overall compass for your life. And so if you have that overall compass and direction, knowing the core of who you are, and then allowing yourself the flexibility to change and morph within that and around that core purpose as time goes on, you're not drifting. You're being intentional in the present moment. You're always intentional. And that's the thing that I think is such a powerful distinction between life planning and just goal setting. Hello, sweet friends. I'm Stephanie Jacobs, a storyteller and advocate for social justice, and your host of the Love Light Stories podcast, a place where we uncover a deeper understanding of humanity through beautiful, redemptive stories that inspire our hearts. If you long to see more love, empathy, and true connection in our world and your own life, you're in the right place. After spending multiple years studying social justice issues, I've realized the power story has in helping us to understand, empathize, and transform our worldviews into something that's just that, views that are truly worldly. Here in this space, we'll embrace our humanity through raw and authentic stories told by real people themselves. We'll amplify their voices and learn to connect in more meaningful ways. Poverty, human trafficking, incarceration, race, immigration, and more. We'll embrace difficult conversations, sometimes controversial topics, and lighthearted stories too. If you wish to uncover the hope, love, empathy, and connection we can find in our fellow humanity, this is a show for you. So, are you ready, lovely? Let's jump in. Well, hello there, lovely. Welcome back to the Love Light Stories podcast, where we create space for real personal stories to be seen, heard, and understood. If you haven't yet, be sure to rate the show, follow, and share it with your family and friends. Today on the podcast, I'm sitting down with Kayla Clark, my family's advisor, to discuss the power of creating a life plan. She has been our family advisor for over a decade, and she's been a guiding hand for me personally throughout my own life planning journey. So I thought it would be fitting as we approach a new year to invite her on the show to help share about this transformational process with you. This is a thought leader type discussion rather than a story, of which I like to do from time to offer encouragement to you in a different way. You'll learn why life planning is different from goal setting, and how you can begin implementing your own life planning practice to transform your life from a place of drifting to living with inspired purpose and intentionality. When I say this is an episode you're not going to want to miss, I really mean it. My husband and I dedicate an entire weekend to the life planning process every January because of the way it transforms our entire year. In fact, it was during our first life planning weekend together that everything clicked, and I finally gained the confidence to leave my job and begin the work that I'm ultimately doing today. Because of the tremendous impact life planning has had on our lives, I've been wanting to share it with you in a more in-depth way for so long, and this is finally it. Frankly, I'm just so excited for you and the potential this has to truly impact your life. Let's get into it, shall we? Kayla, thank you for joining me on the Love Light Stories podcast today. I am so excited to have you here.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
This episode and discussion with you is one that I've wanted to do well before I even started this show, because we have worked together for some time. You've actually been one of our family advisors, and we've worked through life planning. And we're going to get into life planning more as we roll into this conversation. And this is going to be a little bit different of a conversation, actually, because it's less story focused and more of a thought leader personal transformation topic today. So before we get into all of that, I want to just allow yourself to share what you do for families, how you help them, all of that.
Okay, thank you. I really honestly stumbled into this work. I met Justin Anderson, my colleague and the owner of Premier Performance Advising, through my next door neighbor. I was just kind of talking over the fence one day, and my next door neighbor owned his own small business. And I was kind of looking to get back into the workforce after taking some time away to be a new mom. And that was how I met Justin. They shared an office space together, and he was like, hey, I need some help with my own business and getting it started. And the rest is history, as they say. So really, I started out just doing supportive type of junior advisor or business advising type of work where I was doing more work on the back end to help prepare materials, do research, things that were in support of the clients, but not necessarily working directly with them or being that lead advisor in the room. But I got introduced to you and your family pretty early on, and you all really welcomed me right into the fold. I remember the very first sort of family retreat, set of family meetings that I came to with you all, and I just quietly took a seat by the side of the room or at the side of the room, and your dad turned around and said, "We have someone else here. Please join the table." And I was very surprised, but it was such a great experience. And I knew right then and there that getting to know you all and seeing what love and care that you had for each other, I just was really interested in learning more. And so the work that I do now is really wide ranging. I work with a lot of families, family business owners, families of wealth, or just individuals and groups of people that want to just work together better. And that really depends for them in terms of what that looks like. A lot of times with the business consulting, I'm doing work around governance, planning, development, but a lot of times it includes personal development plans, and particularly what we've sort of coined with you all is the life planning process. And I found that, yeah, that this is an incredibly transformative experience for people individually, but also as families. And I've just seen it be so impactful in so many ways. And I'll be quiet there. I would love to hear, knowing that you've been doing this for so many years, what has been, your biggest takeaway? What's been your experience with this and the outcome or the impact it's had for you?
Yes, well, the impact has been incredible. And first of all, I'd like to say that we have been so blessed to have you come alongside us so early in the process. And I just want to clarify that primarily we work with you as a family to focus on that family cohesion aspect. And we have a family foundation, and we've been most recently working on some of those processes and how do we get more clear and definitive on how we want to support organizations and nonprofits around the world and everything of that sort. And so it's been just really great to have you as an advisor. And then the personal development, we've done so much with you over the years, understanding ourselves and how we can better communicate as a family in the work that we're doing around philanthropy and some estate planning and stuff. And so anyway, it's been an all-encompassing thing. And today we're here mostly to talk about the life planning. And so to answer your question, life planning, it's so crazy. I counted the years, and it's been 14 years at the time of this recording that I personally have been doing life planning. I was introduced to it through you guys and my parents, who were kind of the catalyst of getting us, me and my siblings, involved in this. And it's really kind of evolved over time. It was very, very new at the time. Like when I started talking about it with people just off the cuff or with my friends and stuff, I always got the question like, what are you talking about? What's life planning? And I think now it's actually more common of a thing and more people know what it is, but it can be very varied too. So I think we're going to get into that probably as well, of how it's not just one definitive thing. But as time has unfolded, it has been something that has really rooted myself and my husband to give us a compass for our life and where we want to go. And we found it to be a very flexible process too, which a lot of people initially think may not be the case because you're planning your life, but we can get more into that as well later. But yeah, it's just had a huge impact. And before we move forward, actually, Kayla, I would like to hear from you what life planning is and why do life planning? From your perspective, what is it?
Oh, okay, yeah. So I would say life planning is, as you mentioned, it's a very all-encompassing process. And as I think about it, it's really about finding that compass. So, how do I want to live my life? What does it mean for me to be a better version of myself? It's about incorporating intentionality in not only your day-to-day practices, but in who you are as a person and where you want to go in your life. And so when I think about life planning as a tool and how I use it with families, it can be used in a lot of different ways. Again, just personal development. Sometimes that includes professional development. But other times we think about how do we use this to help us be intentional with our values? Am I living with my values? Do I have my own personal, mission or vision or credo as you have, I think, in yours, or you had at one point? I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at life planning as a means to really be thoughtful and intentional and kind of peel back the reason to why we want certain things. And it's not necessarily um, sort of this, I guess, oh, I want this diamond ring. I want to go on this huge trip. I want, but more about why. And I think that's one of the things that we get really great with life planning, and what you've done really well is to say, who do I want to be, but what does that really mean? And at the end of the day, if I am who that person is, or if I'm working on that life plan, if I'm working through those goals, if I'm being intentional, if I'm reflecting and being planful and thoughtful, what does that mean for the impact that I have on the world and the legacy that I want to live and I want to leave behind? One of the things that I thought, Stephanie, that was so unique that you did, and I want to ask you about it actually, is you wrote a eulogy in your life
Yes.
plan. I had never seen or heard of it before, but I mean, you think about, what do people say about you once you're gone? When you leave, what do you leave behind? And so, um, to that, I would ask, how did you come up with that idea?
Yeah, I was going to say that is one of the most powerful exercises in a book called Living Forward, written by Michael Hyatt and Daniel Harkavy. And before we're done with this conversation, you're going to hear about this book multiple times. I can't stop talking about it. I've first encountered it about 6 years ago, and it is actually one of the biggest things that kind of transformed my life planning process. Because as I said, I've been doing this for 14 years, and it wasn't until I read this book and really went through kind of this blueprint of exercises and template and things that this book includes that I really, something clicked. It clicked very differently. And my husband and I both did this at the same time together. And ever since, like literally, I was telling my husband we're going to do this recording of the interview. And he said life planning, like literally, is life changing. And anyway, I credit a lot of that to that book. But the eulogy, I found that it peels back the layers so quickly of who you are and helps you get to your purpose in the core and why you're on this earth. And when you think about, like, when I'm gone, what do I want to have said about the legacy of my life? Like, what do I want that to be? I mean, when you really think about that and reflect on that, it humbles you very quickly, and it helps you really get down to the core of who you want to be. And then you can build your life around that. And so that's why I include that in my life plan, because it's such a grounding practice. And I want to always remember what I'm striving for and who I'm seeking to be, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, right? It's this living forward concept. But what I love about it is, I think they say, start with the end in mind. Um, I think that's great, and I also think start with wherever your energy is, right? Think about what motivates you, what connects you to the life and to the earth and to the world and everything that you want to be connected to. I think there are so many great resources out there, whether that's other books, whether it's productivity planners, guided journals. I think you had mentioned you were putting together a life planning reflection journal. I love all of that. And I think that it is so important and critical to the life planning process of really starting at the core of who you are. What is
Yes.
most valuable, or what do I value most? And how do those values shape my behaviors? How do they help me make decisions? How do they impact how I show up and how I interact with others? being very clear, I think, is something that's really important to this process because it can help anchor us, especially maybe when we're hitting a slump, maybe when we're not getting to those goals that we hoped to achieve as quickly as we thought we might. Being able to come back to that core of who you are and your sort of your purpose and the meaning and the legacy you want to leave is really, really grounding.
Yes, yes. And some of the questions that I always like to reflect on that I think this life planning process really pulls out of us are things like, who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I want to live my life? What do I want my life to look like? And those are kind of hard questions to answer off the cuff, but it's this process of going through all of this that you can come to those answers and they rise to the surface. And I think starting there at the core is so powerful because then you can begin to build the actual tactical things and priorities in your life to make your life reflect that. And it's always going to be, very flexible over time. It's going to change over time. But again, those core things about who you are and how you want to live your life often don't really change. It's just the circumstances of your season that you're in might. And so again, it's just like really, really grounding.
Yeah. I mean, really, it's what does it mean? What does it matter? I really love that idea. And to that point, I think there are so many different aspects along the way once you've created your life plan and you are already teeing that up really well that are really important. So I would love if you're willing to speak to the core components of what you've included in your life plan and why you've done that.
These facets of your life, productive work, family and friend time, faith, personal development, I always keep those as kind of like the big facets of life. And at the end of my life planning process, I end up ordering them in importance. And the order of them changes every year, surprisingly or not surprisingly, just because circumstances change. Some years I'm like focusing way too much on work and I'm level setting and saying, I really need more rest and reflection and, some fun time. But the way that I end up prioritizing them and I do it last is because once I can start again with my core and making sure that's solid and really getting grounded in that, and then looking at the things ahead in the coming year of things I would like to accomplish. And that's getting into the goal part, which is very specific to that time and place and building that out and what that looks like. And then I'm able to prioritize how I can categorize these areas of my life. And I always suggest only focusing on a few key areas and big goals when you actually get to the goal part, because it allows you to really focus and be able to find that purpose in what you're doing. And it also makes sure that you get it done because it's very clear at the end of your planning time. And so anyway, that's how I go about some of it.
Right. I think what I hear you speaking to is this concept that we tend to call the pillars of a balanced life. And really, it's just this holistic idea that's often used actually in more wellness and self-help context, but I find it impactful in this context as well. And basically, it's thinking about all of the different facets of your life that are the pieces of the pie. They contribute to your overall well-being. And I think you nailed it, right? They typically include things like physical and emotional well-being, spiritual fulfillment and faith, personal or intellectual growth, relationships or social connections. For some people, it might be their job or their occupational stability, finances or financial stability. It's all of these different things. And if we were to put them sort of in this column separately each and say, okay, if I were to stack them up next to each other, how am I attending to them? And what I love that you pointed out, Stephanie, is that you said it changes and that's okay. Whether that's life coming at you and saying, hey, nope, we got to redirect and we need to spend more time here or there, or whether it's where you're at personally and saying, hey, you know what? I want to focus more on maybe my physical well-being or my emotional well-being, and I'm going to give that a little bit more attention. And I'm going to boost up that pillar a little bit more. But really the idea that you're getting at is saying, okay, I want to start with the core of who I am and knowing the impact that I want to leave or the legacy that I want to leave behind. Now, what are the facets of that? How does that look in my life?
Yes, yes. And I love that you brought up again that it can change and mold and everything, because one of the most common things when I bring up life planning, and it was very much so at the very beginning when no one knew anything about it, they were like, why would you plan out your whole life? Because it's just going to change anyway. That doesn't make sense. And what I like to say is that it's really a guide. It's not a definitive plan. It allows you to live fully in the present moment while still maintaining that overall compass for your life. And so if you have that overall compass and direction, knowing the core of who you are, and then allowing yourself the flexibility to change and morph within that and around that core purpose as time goes on, you're not drifting. You're being intentional in the present moment. You're always intentional. And that's the thing that I think is such a powerful distinction between life planning and just goal setting. If we don't tie our goals to what's really deeply meaningful, it's not as powerful and inspiring to actually reach those goals. We don't really know why we're reaching those goals, or maybe we have a sense, right? But it's not tied to something deep within us that is more motivating. That's a really big part of helping to understand the power of life planning. And it's really not about living in the future. It's intentionally living in that present moment while keeping the future in mind, and then living your best life every day.
I love that you talked about it not being fixed. And when people ask, why would you plan out your whole life? I love that you were talking earlier about how it changes. Life has seasons. And when we think about, activities we have our kids do in school, they put together time capsules. I bet if you were to go back, Stephanie, to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 14 years ago, to your very first life plan, you might have had very different goals. You might have envisioned things very differently in your life, but how fun is that to open up that time capsule and to go back and to say, wow, look how much I've grown. Look how far I've come. Maybe it wasn't what I thought then, but what a gift to be where I am today. And that reflection and that gratitude, I think, can just be so meaningful.
Yes. And knowing that you've gotten to this place where you are today from intentionality, it doesn't feel like you've lost those however many years, those 14 years for me when I started this. It doesn't feel like I've been drifting through life and allowing life to just take me places. Yet it, of course, looks different. But I will say, like, the way that my actual life has unfolded is different, but the core of what it surrounds itself around is still similar, like helping others and using these certain skills and gifts that I identified back then. I'm still doing that, but it just looks like a different way.
Mm-hmm. And there's often a study that is cited from Dr. Gail Matthews, who did research on goal setting. And I'm sure everyone's heard this one, but participants they found who wrote down their goals on a regular basis were up to 42% more likely to achieve their goals when they wrote them down, just versus not writing them. So just again, that intentional act of saying, this is what I want to do, but having that flexibility in mind that might say, okay, maybe this isn't working for me, or maybe I thought this was, but I've learned more and this isn't the place where I want to be. We always say when we take a look at, trying to achieve something or setting goals, that reflective piece of, what went well, what's worth improving, and not doing that with judgment or criticism, but just discernment. Shirzad Chamine is really great. He wrote a book called Positive Intelligence, and he's a wonderful coach. And he talks about having that discernment and just being able to say, what is this? Not judging, not labeling it good or bad, but here's what it is. And when we look at that in the context of life planning, it's being able to say, okay, if we hit, maybe that's a win. But if we miss, we learn. And either way, we are still stepping forward.
Yes, yes, I love that. And again, when you mentioned the goals and how important and energizing it is to hit those goals, again, like if you just write your goals down, it's not as powerful as if you've started from a place of purpose and intentionality and reaching deep into that core and then connecting those goals to that core. It gives you that confidence and clarity around really your biggest dreams, and they actually feel purposeful and attainable. And in my experience, almost, my husband always says too, he's like, it's amazing how we do this life planning and the next year we come back and review that life plan before we begin our next one. It's amazing how much we've actually accomplished on that. And oftentimes it's not even like we're tracking. I do try to track it and review it quarterly, but we're not often like checking these goals off. They're so rooted and connected to the core of who we are and who we want to be, and like purposefully designed that they just tend to happen because they're part of you. And that's honestly, I think, one of the biggest distinctions that I've come to find in actually giving power to these goals that we ultimately want to reach. It's amazing how it happens.
Yeah, that connection. It's funny, you're hitting sort of on that core of what we tend to use as our foundation. It's a psychological theory called self-determination theory. And I'm not a psychologist, so I can only explain it in simple terms, but you're hitting it. It's basically the arc of motivation. So autonomy, having that control over your actions and your choices, relatedness, feeling connected and connecting to others with your goal, and competence, feeling capable, feeling effective, feeling like you can do it and get it done. Those are all incredibly important for not just setting or achieving goals, but what you're getting to with life planning, which is going beyond goals and how do I thrive? How do I, create and grow and tend to a garden that develops in a way that nourishes me and who I am and nourishes my soul and my life. And it might be that, we can go without one or two of those things. It might be that we might not have the perfect soil, but we might not also thrive. And so when you talk about including others and that connection, it is so critical. And I think that it's not only important just for the well-being, but sharing in it together, having a garden club or whatever that might be, but it also offers a level of accountability. And I think that that is another piece of the life planning process that can be really helpful, is an accountability partner. And in some ways, I think earlier on, that was how we were supporting you all in your journeys and in each of your life planning processes. We built in more regular check-ins. And again, it wasn't with the idea of, did we check all the boxes? Did we get it done? Did we do it at 110%? But really, again, just peeling back the onion and saying, okay, where are we at? How did we do? If you felt differently today, how might you show up? What are the talents that you can focus on? Where have you come, or where have you gone? How far have you gone? Let's look at all of that instead of maybe the shortcomings or where we're not just quite yet.
Yes. I love that, because that's, again, getting at that intentionality piece of intentionally living and not judging yourself or shaming yourself for what you're not completing, which I think a goal list on its own can tend to do. You can say, I'm behind. I didn't get everything done. I'm not meeting my goals. I fell off the bandwagon. Whoops, that one's gone. I'm not even going to try that one anymore. The life planning in that context, like you were just describing, takes away all of that negativity and instead just infuses with that energy of, how is life going and how can I make tweaks? And wow, look, I actually got this done. And that's really empowering. And it's just a really beautiful process.
Well, and that's one thing too, as we think about, it's not just goals, whether it's outcome goals or process goals, but it's being intentional about what it's going to take to get there. People like to use SMART goals or other, different types of processes to help them with it, or that can be helpful tools to support life planning. But one of the things that I've seen you do so well in your life plan and this process around checking in is the support, right? And saying, okay, here's what I want to get to. Here's who I want to be. Here's what I want to do. What's going to be required? And not just of me, but what asks might I need to make? Who might I need to ask for help or lean on to be able to do this? Because then when we take a look and we say, okay, maybe that's, the quarterly review or the review that you and Sam do now at the end of each year before you start your next life plan. it might be, okay, these were the things that I needed to get it done, and did that happen or didn't it? That's separate. What I'm looking at is, gosh, did I not really be intentional about how much I might have needed to devote more time, energy, resources, or whatever it might have been to be more successful in this area or to accomplish this thing. And with where I'm at now, how has that changed? What have I learned? What do I need to do differently?
Yes, I'm really glad you brought that up because that is a huge part of it as well, is making sure your environment and those you surround yourself with are setting you up for success and actually living out who you want to be. It takes some trial and error too, I think. And one of the things too, when you talk about the support of others around you, it's one of my tips and tricks really of the life planning process is once you've created this life plan or thought through, gone through this process, not to keep it to yourself, but to share it with those that it's going to influence and or affect in your life. So for me right now, it's my husband. And so we actually, part of our life planning process, at the end of it, we schedule time to sit down. Actually, we're usually not sitting down. We are walking on the beach in Amelia Island, Florida, which we'll get to. It's another one of my tricks or things that I really find is super helpful in doing this process is to get away. But we tend to take the last day of our time away and sharing it with each other and really talking about our individual dreams and everything and making sure that we are supported by each other. Because some of our goals and dreams may not be a fit for our family or for each other in this particular moment. And maybe we have to adjust and talk about how we can tweak them. Or on the flip side, just sharing them allows us to really support each other and advocate for each other in those moments of daily life where, I say, Sam, I really want to take time to do this today. And he will know why, because we've talked about it and the importance that it has for me. And so it's just a really great way to create alignment and better communication and connection too. We found it's been a really helpful thing for our relationship overall.
Yes, I love that. And while I myself, as the avid list maker, constantly writing them down, whatever my goals are, things to do in journals and scratch paper on other list pads, I have lists that tell me to reference other lists. I think what you're getting to is taking the time to do it and really sort of flesh out that core of the life plan in a very meaningful and intentional way. And again, I think that you can do this in a lot of different ways. What you have found and what we tend to encourage is get away from your day to day a little bit. Get away from maybe the usual scenery. Don't answer your phone or all of the text messages or the work emails or whatever that might be. I love the idea of incorporating nature or being in a space that really lights you up and gives you good energy. That is really important to be able to feel like you can take the time and the energy and just commit that to your process. Being in a space that maybe is really important to you for one reason or another, whether that's the beach and maybe it was a first date or a honeymoon, or I like to go up north. I love spending time on the North Shore in Minnesota and walking around in the woods and being on Lake Superior. That to me, that's where I do a lot of my reflection and have conversations around who do I want to be and what does that look like for, again, not just the year, but long term.
Yes. And you mentioned getting away from your phone and email and all of those things. And it is really critical, I have found. I would highly encourage people who want to try this life planning process or creating a life plan, which, by the way, can look so many different ways, which maybe we'll get into in a moment too, Kayla, just tactically, like how do you begin that and everything. But I want to touch on this getting away thing. It's so powerful that if you can get away, I would not start your life planning process until you get away. But if you can't, you can still do it at home. But I found during the COVID-19 pandemic, Sam and I didn't get away and we weren't able to. And it was really the only year that we weren't. And it took me, I think, literally 4 or 5 days to put this together on my couch. I was so unmotivated. I was exhausted. It just was so different versus we take about 2.5 to 3 days. We drive down to Amelia Island, Florida. For us, it's like a 4 or 5 hour drive. And just being away from all distractions. You don't have to cook. You don't have these things laying on your desk, these lists that you say, oh, well, I'll just, I'm going to go get the mail quick and I'll go through the mail, or all these things. It happens when you're home. But when you get away, it really does, we call it a life planning retreat. And it really does feel like a retreat. And we are there solely to focus on ourselves and what we need as a person, our core needs and beliefs, desires, and then we couple that with getting more tactical as the time goes on. But we're surrounded by the ocean and we sit out on the deck and we hear the waves, and then we take a break and go for a walk and talk about some of the things we're working on. And then we go to dinner at night, and it's a very, very different thing. And we come back fully rejuvenated too. It's just incredible. I'll share really quickly the first year that we actually did this, where we went to Amelia Island, got away on our own. It was the first year we read the Living Forward book. I was at work and I was so sick and I was just really run down, and we had this life planning weekend planned and I was just kind of burnt out. I was taking on more at work, covering for someone, part of different committees. I was working on a random video project that was outside of my scope of work and all these things. And it made me sick because I was so stressed out and working so much. And my boss said, just go home, take the rest of the day, pack for your weekend, and come back on Tuesday. And so that's what I did. And literally the first day I was sick, but by the end of that day and the next morning, I was completely better, and my head was clear, and I actually felt alive again, because I was really at a kind of a low place. I was feeling burned out and everything. And I was like, I have the power and control to lead my life in the way that I want. And I can make these tweaks at work. I can ask for this. I can make this more sustainable. I can change how I rest at home. And literally since then, my entire view on life planning has changed so much, because I saw how it literally made me physically better.
Yeah, that psychological and that physical energy can be a huge boost. And what I love about what you're talking about with your life plan is that it's, again, going back to this idea that it's not necessarily just for one person. I see you and Sam using this as a tool to deepen your relationship. And I think that can be really a wonderful gift and a great outcome that might be unexpected as well, because you're taking the time to do something together and to come together and say, hey, here's what I'm at. Here's what I've learned. Here's who I want to be. These are the things that I want to do, and I want to do together with you, or I need your help to be able to do. All of those things, when we're having the conversation with those people who are most important to us in our lives, whether that's a spouse or a partner, our parents, our siblings, a friend, it can really, really make a huge difference. And what I hear you getting to is this idea not just about being intentional with your life plan, but being planful with your life planning process and that retreat. And I do want to, just emphasize the importance of, this isn't just a weekend getaway. This isn't, oh, we're going to go to the beach and we're going to have a good time and we're going to go for walks and that's our life plan.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's so much deeper than that. And that's something that I do want to talk about a little bit, if you're open to, is what does your process look like? And I can share how we tend to maybe tee it up, or different suggestions that we have. But are there intentional things or sort of agenda items that you incorporate into your weekend retreat, your process?
Yes, I love that question, because now we're getting into more of the tactical things of, how do I do this? How do I begin this life planning process? And I think, as listeners will find by the end of this conversation, there's no one size fits all. It can be very fluid. And I'll share just the things that I've learned that have worked for myself as well as my husband. And then, like you said, you have other things as an advisor who works with families and individuals on this, and other tips and tricks that work for people. But for me, first of all, I actually have learned to prep before I go. And this is not getting into my life planning, not into the reflection piece yet or anything, but I've found that if I can bring some tactical inputs to what I ultimately want to get out of the process when I'm done, it allows me more time to actually do the hard work, or actually the more enjoyable work, if I'm honest, of the reflection and the core needs and the goal setting and everything we talked about when we get there to our life planning retreat. So some of the things I prep beforehand is our budget, like what I know our budget to be for the coming year. And it's usually not fleshed out because our life planning, like our goals and things on our life plan, inform our budget as well. But just as best the knowledge that I have before I go, we prepare that ahead of time, as well as like any vacation time that we have or vacations that are already scheduled. And then business and work priorities that I already know about. And so those can be kind of plugged into the overall life plan. But again, those are very tactical details and they're really not that important. But at the end of the process, I want to have this picture of what my plan for the year will hopefully look like, right? And so I do that beforehand. It saves me a lot of time and I actually don't have to focus on that work, which is less meaningful when I get there. And then when I get to our retreat or wherever you are starting this life planning process, the first thing I do is I start with a list of reflection questions, and they reflect on the previous year. They reflect on the core of who I am and really help to set out this foundation and groundwork for moving into the actual life planning process itself. And those questions I came up with myself. They're ones that I found useful and helpful for me. And that is actually, you mentioned earlier, the yearly life planning reflection journal that I've put together. That journal includes all of those questions. And I've decided to just create it to be able to share with everyone in my audience because it's been so helpful for me. It's something that I hope can be helpful for others as well. So I start there, and then, like I said, you're going to hear about this book a lot before I'm done here, but I use the Living Forward book every year. I went through it the first year, like I said, when I was so sick and everything. I went through it very in depth then. I don't read the whole thing every year, but I go back through it because he walks you through the very beginning of digging into your core, some activities, like we said, the eulogy and lots of things like that, but then getting into the action plan and more tactical things. And so I review that as a way to kind of ground myself in the importance of my purpose and everything. And then I start getting into what are the core big goals or big areas of my life that I really want to focus on this year, and how, like, what are the main tasks and or sub goals within those things that I'd like to hit on. And then, of course, what support do I need? Do I need to get support from anyone, or what are the resources that I need? And then it gets much more tactical, right? I usually set aside some time for my business. It may be working on my project plan for a certain project, or my editorial calendar for my podcast episodes, things like that, where it gets a lot more tactical. Then the last part of our retreat is more together, where we're walking on the beach, talking about our goals, like we've already discussed, and sharing those. And then we align on our shared household budget and vacation time. And you can see how it kind of builds into this more very detailed plan, but it's all building from this intentional place. So that's how we do it. That's kind of really the process that we go through. And we just use a template, a Word document template that I think, Kayla, you actually helped us put together. We still use that. And then my husband uses other apps and stuff, like he'll use Trello to manage and keep track of things. I use Asana to keep track of my actual project plans. There's different ways to actually go about managing this, but the process of identifying what's important to you can be similar. And actually, Kayla, I think you have some really good ways to get into that core stuff too, like activities and suggestions too. So do you want to share some of those things that you've done with families and other tips and tricks?
Sure, I would love to. So going back to kind of that tactical piece that you're speaking about is I think where we tend to use those SMART goals, the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-based, that can just be helpful to help plan out. You being a former project manager and probably having much more access to these types of tools and Gantt charts and all of these things, Again, use what helps you. And I love that you spoke to the difference in how each of you and your husband manage each of your own life plans. Um, I love the idea of an app. I'm a list maker, so I love to use Todoist. I love Taco by Trello. I love all of those things. However, what I would want to caution is don't try to do it all. Use what matters to you, use what works for you, find what works for you. The last thing we want is to create something that is so big or too much that it becomes overwhelming. The life planning process is really meant to be empowering. And so if we're trying to do too many things all at once, sometimes that can actually be demotivating. So if you have methods that you know work for you, do that. For some people, that's just having a physical planning book where it has maybe some of those guided reflection questions, or maybe it's just a blank journal where you write it down and you continue to add to it and come back to it throughout the year. I think that it's so important to find what works best for you and to continue to reflect on how you can make this an iterative process that continues to support your own growth and development. But when we're thinking about, other activities or exercises, things like that, I think similar to the eulogy exercise, one thing that I've found to be really impactful for families, some of which I've worked with who come together to do some of their life planning, where they're having a family retreat, where they're getting away for a weekend, or they're intentionally sitting down together, and they share some of these different stories with each other. And one of the things, or one of the exercises that we've used that I've seen be really impactful is what we call the 80th birthday exercise. And again, all it is a set of questions that just puts you in that space, thinking to your 80th birthday, or, if mom or dad are a little bit older, your 90th or your 100th birthday. Who's there? Who are the loved ones that are looking at you and celebrating you? What are they sharing and saying? What are the fun things or the stories? And I have just seen that be so powerful and meaningful for families. And then they're able to explore together about why they wanted certain people there, or what it was really at the core of why accomplishing something or doing something in their life was so meaningful and important. And that's where we see with families wanting to do more together, where they can tie their life planning, as you've done, to your budgeting, to finances or financial health, but also philanthropy planning. That philanthropic initiative can be really difficult for families to start at times because we have different things that are meaningful for each of us. But if we can come together and say, hey, where are we at with each one of our life plans? And again, going back to that core, those core values, what's really most important at the end of the day? And what are those different causes or groups of people or initiatives that help us to fulfill that? And again, with this process, it's not necessarily tied to money, right? There are different gifts, talents, time that we can share to give to others. And so I look at using life planning not just as, setting goals and things you want to accomplish for yourself, but how do you want to change the world? What would that mean? What would that matter? So as we look at, the development itself, again, it's different for different people. One thing I love that your dad has done with his life plan is he has embedded hundreds of quotes. And I think that's become its whole other spin-off project of the Steve Johnston quote compilation of all of the most meaningful things that he found in life. But wow, what just another legacy to leave behind. But things like that, whether it's song lyrics or quotes or poems, maybe verses from the Bible, again, it's incorporating those things that are going to continue to draw you back to it in a way that's motivating and meaningful, and not, okay, it's the end of the month, or okay, it's the end of the quarter or the year, I got to go back through my life plan again. If that's how you're feeling about it, that's not what we want. That's not going to be impactful for you nearly as much as it is when you're excited and energized to go back to it and to say, okay, where am I at?
Yes. And I love too how you brought up the philanthropy piece again and the family cohesion and all of that, because that's essentially how we started working with you, like we said at the beginning, and started the life planning process as a family. And I recently just took on more of a role of helping to lead and coordinate our family philanthropy efforts. And you're right, it is a big task, and there's a lot of different voices in the room with different personalities and different core purposes and causes that we care about, and being able to really get to our own core first and share that with the family and communicate that, just like my husband and I do on our retreats. We have family retreats like you were describing, where we do more of that work, and we do it with you and Justin. And it's, again, that intentional practice that brings you together around what matters to you, but then more importantly, what you share together as a family and how you can implement that in the work you do together for the world. And in our case, in this instance, philanthropy. And so it really is just such a beautiful, applicable process that really empowers yourself and everyone you love around you to work together and build something greater out of your life, leave that legacy behind.
Yeah, I love that you're speaking to the family cohesion piece in this. And again, we think about different exercises that we can use as we go along and incorporate this life planning tool in other areas or aspects of our life, such as philanthropy. There was one year where we had each of you present to your family, hey, here is this cause that I care about. Here's why. Here's why I believe it's important. Here's who it helps. Here's all the good things it does and the impact and how that ties not only to my personal development and my life plan, but to our family and our shared family values. Using processes or other models like the 5 whys. And again, just continuing to ask why, not to challenge someone or to, shut them down or to share maybe, what you don't like about, part of their life plan or a philanthropic effort that they care about, but to really understand it. What does it mean? What does it matter? What does it improve? And does that tie back to that core purpose?
Yes. Yes. And for those listening, you might be like, wow, this is really an exciting thing. Like, I didn't understand life planning in this way. It's something that I'm interested in, or maybe dipping my toes in. But you're probably like, we've talked about a lot today and a lot of different ways you can go about this. And it might still feel a little ambiguous as to how to get started. And so one thing that I would love to do is I'd love to share what I've put together as resources to help you do that. And Kayla, if you want to tag onto that, please do, because again, this started with you as my advisor. I'm just coming from the table of having done this for so many years and finding what works. And I want to leave everyone listening with a place to start so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. And so that's part of why I created this yearly life planning reflection journal, because again, I said the way I start is really with that reflection piece. And in that journal, I also include my favorite life planning resources. I talk about this Living Forward book, of course, but I also have 2 blog posts in there that really share more about the process that I use and the tips and tricks and things of that sort. So I'm trying to kind of give you some places to start to go on your own to dig into this. And then I also have an option where you can actually work with me to refine, answer questions, share experience, talk out your life plan, any of the above in anyone who does grab this life planning reflection journal. So trying to give you some resources to begin with, to dig into. And I really do believe if you use this Living Forward book as one of your resources, you're going to feel like you're so much more confident in what you're doing and it won't feel as ambiguous. And like we said, this is a fluid process. It's flexible. And so you can use a lot of other resources as well to tag on to that. But personally, I recommend that as a really, really great start. I'll include it in the show notes, of course, as well as the blog post and a link to the reflection journal. And then, I want to try to walk with you if you would like to do this, because I do think it's so powerful. So I do have that option.
Yes, take advantage of it. Meet with
Yeah.
her. Talk to Stephanie. She will help you. I can't
Yes.
tell you how impactful and important an accountability or a sounding partner is in this process. And I think Steph, you of all people are just so genuine and positive and supportive. And I think that that can be really, really helpful for people in actualizing their goals. And even when they're not able to, right? Being able to come back to someone and say, hey, I'm really struggling. What was your experience? And I know, and for all of her listeners out there, she will share with you her experience and what those setbacks were. And then also provide what she can to share how she got through it, or help you to be a sounding board and to just help you work through maybe what your next steps are.
Yes, yes. I think having the ability to have someone you can lean on as you're going through this process or just starting, it gives you a lot of confidence and support, and it makes your own process more fluid and flexible as well, because you can really begin to dig into things that are unique to you.
And speaking, Stephanie, to the tangibility of this, right? And what is a life plan? How does it look? We've talked about you can make it whatever it is that speaks to you. One of the things, though, that I do want to point out that I think you have done very well in yours is you haven't just said, here are all the goals I want to accomplish. Here are the different sort of pillars or places of my life that they tie to. You've actually been really great about breaking that down into more bite-sized, manageable chunks and saying, okay, what are my annual goals? But what are my 5-year goals, 10-year goals, life goals? You've actually gotten a little bit more granular so that it's not just at the end of the year, okay, what were all the things I did? It's what are the things that I'm doing that are really helping me to get to where I ultimately want to go? And so that's, I think, a critical component that I don't want your listeners to forget is, yes, long term, yes, big picture, and also day to day. And again, those goals can be process goals. So again, it's not necessarily that you're doing anything other than the things that are in support of your well-being and that life planning. Again, that might be just going for walks, taking care of your mental health, taking care of your physical health, being intentional about what you're eating or your diet, things like that, that maybe play into your overall bigger life planning goal of that might be perhaps losing weight, or it could be really just feeling healthy. So I don't want to minimize that there are different types of goals here, and others are process. Outside of process goals are those outcome goals. I do want to do this thing. I do want to read 10 books. And so balancing those, I think, is really important too.
Yes, definitely. Because having those longer term, 5-year, 10-year, like, where am I headed? And then how is my yearly or today goals going to tie into that? That's part of what really gives you that compass of what you're steering towards. And that's how 10 years from now you look back, and again, it might look different than what you wrote on paper, but it was intentional and you weren't drifting, and you feel confident in that. And there's so much power and value in that.
Mm-hmm. And I think to anyone who's curious about it, or anyone who's ever said, "Oh yeah, I've written goals before and I didn't, achieve them, and it ended up making me feel worse." Again, life planning is more than just goal setting. It's a lot more intentional. It's a lot deeper. It can be incredibly transformational. And just take one step. It kind of reminds me of this song that I really like listening to. It starts out, to change the world, start with one step, however small, right? Like that first step is hardest. And what I love about that, it's just do what you can and continue to build. It can be a building process. It can be a growth process and a journey. And it doesn't just have to be you go it alone.
Yes, I love that reminder. I think that is a great place to end, Kayla. But before we say goodbye, I'd like to just ask if people want to connect with you that are interested in the work that you do with families, how can they find more about what you do and Premier Performance Advising?
Go to the website. That's it, premierperformanceadvising.com. We're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but we work with families all over the country. And when they want to go outside of the country for their journeys or their retreats. So
yes,
the sky's the limit. It's really what's comfortable for you. But if you're curious, give us a look on our website.
Wonderful. Well, Kayla, this has been such a good conversation. I can't wait for listeners to hear this. And I just thank you so much for being on the show. I have envisioned doing something like this with you for so long because it really is. I feel like it's a hidden secret. Like more people need to learn about this and know about this. And you were one of the people really that were there at the beginning of my journey 14 years ago. So again, it's just a complete honor to have you on the show. And I thank you so much.
The honor and the pleasure is mine, Stephanie. I love that you're sharing this with others, and thank you so much for having me.
Lovely. I really hope you found this conversation helpful in understanding life planning better. And honestly, I hope we've inspired you to give it a try. If you've been around for a while, this probably isn't the first time you've heard me talk about life planning. I've tried to share about it multiple different ways, but I've still felt like I haven't been able to convey the magic of the life planning process until now. This episode was my best attempt at sharing why life planning is so powerful, how it's transformed my own life, and how you can get started for yourself. I truly just want you to experience the freedom and purpose it's given me, which is why I took the time to create my own yearly life planning reflection journal to help you cultivate more alignment and purpose in your own life. It'll help you start at the beginning, the most important part, by digging into your core to find what really truly matters to you and why, as well as tips, my favorite resources, and more. It's only $7, which I know I'm basically giving it away, but I really just want everyone to have the chance to transform their life in the way I have. I hope you'll take me up on it. And if you'd like additional support, I'm here to guide you along the way. You can find the journal at stephaniemjacobs.com/shop. And don't go anywhere. Just stay tuned for a quick overview of what you can expect right here. Have you tried creating goals for the new year, month, or season only to find that life takes over and pushes those goals aside? Do your goals sometimes feel like have-tos instead of get-to-dos? Imagine taking the time to first dig deep into the core of your feelings, emotions, needs, and desires to find what really matters to you and why. Imagine if you could uncover the deep held value behind your goals, turning your have-tos into get-to-dos. Say hello to the yearly life planning reflection journal. This yearly reflection journal helps you cultivate more alignment and purpose in your life. Perfect for anyone who wants to find their inner peace and inspiration for the season ahead. This reflection journal will help you dig deep into your core of your feelings, emotions, needs, and desires to help you find what really matters to you and why. Access your feelings and emotions to align your heart with your goals. Find an inner peace and calm to help you achieve your goals with hope and enthusiasm. Reflect upon your current life so that you can begin the next step of creating a life plan. And resources to help you do so. You can see the full list of things included at stephaniemjacobs.com/shop, where you can click on the reflection journal to learn more. Oh, and did someone say bonus? When you purchase the yearly life planning reflection journal, you'll gain exclusive access to purchase a reduced rate 30-minute one-on-one life planning coaching session with me to help you move into the process of creating your life plan. You were made with a specific purpose, and you deserve to take time to find greater alignment in your life and uncover that purpose. It's some of the most important work you'll ever do after all, lovely. Check out the journal at stephaniemjacobs.com/shop. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast and leaning into today's story. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't ever miss an episode. And a great way you can support these conversations is to rate the show and leave a review. And if you have a friend who would like these stories, share it with them too. All of these things are the best way you can support this podcast. So thank you. And until next time, lovelies, Keep radiating that love and light to everyone you meet.